participation in today's outreach efforts. Please remember that you can contact most of these groups during regular business hours throughout the week, and that you can call the number on your screen now and have your questions answered in English or in Spanish. If you're a teenager and would prefer to speak with another teen, just say so when you call.
Funding for 13 Live is made possible by grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Jr. Charitable Trust, the Jacob Burns Foundation, and by the members of 13.
New therapies and better medical management have allowed many people with AIDS to live longer. But in spite of these advances, most die within 2 years of diagnosis. Yet some persons with AIDS have defied these odds. How have they done it? Good evening, I'm Paul Gorman. Welcome to 13 Live. Tonight we'll meet 3 long-term survivors of AIDS. Michael Cowan, singer and author of Surviving AIDS; Norma Crespo, a former IV drug user and prostitute who now leads a support group for persons who have tested positive to the HIV virus; and Eleanor Goff, a dancer, teacher, and author of a self-help booklet for persons with AIDS. One note, Channel 13 is offering an AIDS hotline helpline tonight. So if you have any questions about AIDS, you can call 1-800-468-9913 until 12:30 tonight. The number will appear on your screen periodically throughout the show. Thank you all for being here.
For having me.
I appreciate your coming. Michael, fewer than 30% of all men infected with AIDS, I understand, survive more than 3 years, I guess. And yet, you've been with us since diagnosis for 9 years.
Frustrating my many, my many critics, yes. I'm about to celebrate the 9th anniversary of my official diagnosis with full-blown AIDS. And I wrote a book about my own experience as a survivor, and I also interviewed dozens of other long-term survivors and tried to present what patterns there are so that other people could learn from what other people who have come before them.
But speaking of yourself for the moment, is there any way you account to yourself for how you've stayed through this for such a long time?
Well, it sounds contradictory, but I believe that I'm alive because I'm a skeptic. I have refused to do anything just because someone told me to do it, especially doctors. I've done my own homework, and I've generally taken a very skeptical wait-and-see attitude to medications and various... I didn't believe the propaganda. Everybody told me that I was going to be dead within 2 years, and I just have always been frisky and difficult, and I decided that that was not going to be my fate, and I've worked very hard at staying alive.
Is there part of you that's a believer as well as a skeptic? And if there is, believer in what?
Believer in the preciousness of life. That's been, I think, the source of sustaining the tremendous effort that it takes to stay alive, given all the propaganda and all of the negative things in this society which communicate to people with AIDS, just go die, just stop fighting, there's no point, go crawl off and die. And I'm just too mean to die. That's my mom's theory whenever she's asked why I've survived. She said he always was too mean, so.
Norma, are you too mean to die?
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. You were diagnosed in 1985, I guess, had a bout with PCP pneumonia in 83, and I wanted to ask you, since it must occur to a lot of people, and you've spoken about it, so when you first learned that you had AIDS, did it feel to you like a death sentence?
Yes, it did.
No.
I was only given a year to live, and I just refused to die.
From the start? I mean, did that sense of death sentence, how did you turn that around?
I believe I stopped using drugs, because to me, that was my problem, my using of drugs, and just refusing to let this little virus kill me. I just refuse to let it, you know.
But what kind of attitude did you have to change to reach that point of, as you call it, refusal?
Attitude? I guess I had to get more positive, more real about myself. I had to realize that what I was doing was, by using drugs, all I was going to do was shorten my life. Also, I'm very, I believe in spiritual healing. I also have a problem following doctor's orders. I'm very against medications. And I'm like you in a way where you told me to take something, I just do the opposite.
Let me ask you really the same question, Eleanor, in a different way. I just noticed the booklet that you've written called There's Always Something You Can Do, which is a booklet I guess you share with a self-help group. And just before the program started, I found this quote that you put in from Shakespeare's sonnet. It says, "Then let not winter's ragged hand deface in thee thy summer." How have you prevented winter's ragged hand from defacing in thee thy summer?
Well, read the last line.
With beauty's treasure ere it's be self-killed, that's for thyself to breed another thee.
Another thee.
So what's the other thee?
Your real self. Not the sick self or the frightened self, but the reservoir that we all have within ourselves, that each individual has within themselves to use as a resource. And how to do that, to develop, to bring out that inner self, which really has no end. And when you have that perspective, when you have that experience, that exists, that you exist as more than what you feel you are, the details don't seem to matter so much. So you have another perspective. So that's what that means, to build another thee. That's the thee.
And yet you say there's always something you can do.
Oh, yes, there's always something you can do on this level, on this everyday level, to use those resources that you have within yourself, which we all have.
Each of you...
Techniques of breathing, concentration, techniques of, why do I feel so dreadful this morning? I mean, where do I feel so awful? What is it in here? Can I translate the emotion into a physical clot that I can see? Can I get rid of that clot so I can go about the day? That's what I mean by there's always something you can do, because you always have a part of yourself here that isn't sick.
You've each expressed a little bit of skepticism about medical treatment, and yet, Michael,
I
you...
have a very traditional, good medical treatment. Probably, I feel, about the best I could get, and I respect it.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Michael, you've written about the importance to your survival of your relationship to your doctor. So clearly, despite some skepticism, that relationship seems important.
Yeah, I want to be very clear. I don't think that it's advisable for anybody with a disease as serious as AIDS to turn their back entirely on Western medicine. One of the profiles, characteristics of the long-term survivors that I interviewed was that they all spoke very movingly of what they referred to as healing partnerships. Ultimately, choices, and they valued their relationship with their healthcare providers. They often had more than one. They valued their expertise, but they did not do anything just because they were told to do it. They took responsibility for the choices that they were all going to have to suffer from. You know, we're the ones that are going to have to get side effects. We're the ones who may die or live if we make the right choice. I just wanted to say, for every pattern I found among long-term survivors, I found an exception or two. And I'm probably the least spiritual person you're likely to meet. Many of the survivors spoke, as these women are doing, about a rebirth of spirituality or a reconnection with things spiritual. I'm an atheist. I am totally, that has not played any part whatsoever in my own survival strategy, but it was very moving to me how often and how beautifully survivors have talked about that as an important element in their survival strategy.
Norma, I know you work with HIV users, and maybe with a population of people who don't have the opportunity to establish the kind of steady healing relationship that Michael talks about. Is that relationship less accessible for people, you know, who have AIDS or HIV positive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what are you trying to do to compensate for that, to help people work that through without that support? Talk with them, counsel them, you work with positives.
Okay, we have a 12-step meetings, which is not religious, but it is spiritual. Our main focus is to help them stay away from drugs. We counsel them completely, we educate them, we send them to schools if they want to be educated about the disease. But mainly we focus on their addiction because we are dealing with recovering addicts.
I want to just ask a couple questions about different medical treatments. I know there are a variety of them, and Michael, you've spoken strongly about problems you have with AZT. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I am totally opposed to the use of AZT in any dose in anybody for any length of time. And I've taken a lot of hits for that very public position. And one of the things that was so reassuring after I had interviewed nearly 4 dozen long-term survivors was they shared my view. Only 3 of the people that I interviewed had ever taken AZT, and they only took it for a brief period of time, and frankly 2 of them have since died. AZT, I believe, is causing more harm than helping. I believe there's going to be a tremendous price to pay in terms of cancer and other long-term consequences of the kind of promiscuous prescribing of AZT. I am, however, very Western medicine oriented. I take about 50 pills a day, largely prophylactic strategies. I take medication to prevent the half-dozen diseases which kill most people with AIDS. So I'm in a kind of funny, I'm Western identified in terms of Western medicine as the primary approach I take, but I'm very selective and very critical and very skeptical.
I know, Eleanor, both you and Norma, however, are on AZT. What's your experience been with it, Eleanor?
It's been helpful because in the beginning I had neurological problems, and I'm not a pill taker, ever have been. But the doctors explained that the research they had done showed that the AZT did help with neurological problems. It went through the blood-brain barrier, and so I thought, well, if they know that, then I'll do it. And they also said that you have a very hard, tough time the first 2 or 3 months. If you could get past that, it will level off and it won't be so difficult. So I agreed to do that. And the problems I was having, such as losing my balance, tipping over to the side, coordination problems, focusing my thoughts, concentration, have all been helped because those were the neurological problems. So in this case, I accepted it. I accepted to do that.
We've talked about a healing relationship in medicine. One thing we haven't talked about is music. And I know that for Michael, music, I guess, has been an important part of your survival and your expressiveness. Tell us a little bit about the Flirtations, the group that you sing with.
Well, for the last 3 years, I've been involved in an openly gay male, politically aware, doo-wop a cappella singing group. It comes out of my experience as a person with AIDS. With whatever time I have left on this earth, I want to fight to make this world a better place. Not just in terms of access to AIDS care, but racism, sexism, all those horrible isms that we choke on in life. And I like to challenge the image most people have of people with AIDS as incapacitated and passive. And I'm out there I will make art till I drop, and trying to share with audiences the sense of preciousness that I have about life and life's pleasures.
Happily,
I have to say bravo.
Because you're a dancer.
And not only that, but I find if you could just reach something in your own life that's much more important to you, whether it's a work or a person or whatever it may be, AIDS becomes irrelevant. And that, I think, is a cure.
Well, we're flirting with the audience, talking about the flirtations, and we have a clip from, I guess the song is Living in Wartime. Can you just tell us a little bit about the song?
Well, it's from my angry period. I wrote it about what it felt like to have your friends drop in like flies and not be able to get access to proper medical care, and have most of the people in your life who are not immediately affected by AIDS walk around as if there's not a war on.
Right. Let's take a look at the clip from Living in Wartime.
They try to break our spirits, they try to keep us in our place. They do it to the women and the poor of every race. We face a common enemy of bigotry and greed. If we fight together, we can find the strength we need. We can find the strength we need. We are living wartime. Oh, we are living, it's just like living in wartime. Oh, we are living in wartime. We are living in wartime. Will not go away. More die every day. This is war. This is war.
Norma was smiling at the end of the song. What were you smiling at?
It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
It is. Because
Do
it
you
is
feel
a
like
war.
you're at war?
Yes.
I know particularly in the city for IV drug users, there are so few treatment slots, and the big battle over needle exchange versus clean needles, it communicates a message to people that we as a society don't really care whether they live or die. And it's very hard to live, to breathe that kind of air.
Right. Let's talk about that.
That's where my work comes in. Just having to put all that aside and for the individual to go into themselves to find that healing within themselves. That's as an antidote.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the attitudes that you do encounter from other people. You are, I guess, seen tonight by some as people with AIDS. And I know, Michael, you helped write the Denver Principles, in which you insisted that people be called people with AIDS, not victims, not patients. My question to all of you, though, is this. How much do people primarily or even exclusively see you as that? People with AIDS, not just people, but primarily as people with AIDS. Do you run into that, Eleanor?
Well, I have an advantage in my age.
How so?
I don't care what people... it doesn't matter to me about a job, a landlord, insurance, and all those things that younger people have to deal with. I mean, my children are grown. I don't know how a young mother copes with it. That's just awful. Yeah. But I don't have those concerns that they do. My concern is different, and that's why if someone is it doesn't matter to me.
Norma, but you're a mother yourself, and you have 3 children.
Yes.
I guess you come from a family of
16.
16? That's great. What's been your experience as a mother of this condition and people's reactions to it? How have the children been?
I had a lot of rejection from my oldest son.
Why?
Not only was he dealing with a mother who abandoned him while I was struggling, also coming out in the open, letting them know that I was also a prostitute. I was, when they were growing up, half of their lives, I wasn't there for them. And now finding out that I have AIDS, it's like telling them, Mom is dying, she's going to leave us again.
And how did you deal with that?
At first, I guess I just went spin right out again and started using drugs again.
Because of the reaction of the kids?
Yes.
Yeah.
I also was dealing with my mother's rejection. My mother, she's pretty old, and she was brought up in the, she's not very well educated when it comes to the disease. I had a lot of treatment from her and my family, especially my father. I was treated like a leper. I couldn't drink coffee from their cups. And it was very painful. At first, I guess that's why I wanted to live. I made up my mind that I'm not going to let this kill me.
And one of your daughters, I understand, has been working closely with you on
Yes,
this.
my 19-year-old daughter.
How has she been supporting you? Tell us about that.
She's there for me. I could actually go and talk to her, tell her what I'm going through, what pains, I could sit down and actually ask her questions because she's taking the time to educate herself. My daughter's in college right now, and she's taking a lot of her time, especially her free time. Like in the summers, instead of going, traveling, taking vacations, she takes herself and educates herself.
And the rest of the family?
I still get a lot of rejection from them.
Well, that's painful.
And my youngest son is like, he doesn't want to hear it. He's like in a way of denial. He knows what I have, but he doesn't want to talk about it. Every time a program television comes that has to do with AIDS, he would just turn it off.
Do they live with you?
Right now, I'm living in a recovery house for drug addicts, recovering addicts.
Mm-hmm. Have you had experience, Michael, with how people who face the kind of family problems that Norma speaks of, how they've dealt with them?
Yes, one of the characteristics of the long-term survivors is they do what they called emotional house cleaning. They looked at relationships that needed work, and they approached people and said, look, we've had these problems, we have these problems, can we resolve them? And if not, they got those people out of their lives, and they cultivated, wherever possible, relationships that supported their struggle to survive. It's not always possible. When you have children, it's very painful and difficult. But I would, urge you, even if it's your children, not to put yourself in situations where people are not being supportive of your struggle.
That's why I came into recovery, and I was able just to remove myself. I also put my family, my children, like they say, on the shelf. Just forget about them, think about me.
Do you think you feel as if you found a different kind of family now?
Yes,
No.
because they're there for me, they're supportive. They don't, if I need to cry, they're right there. I could just, whatever I'm going through, I could talk about. Something in my family will not be there for me. I can actually pick up a phone, call my mother and say, Mom, I have a pain, or I'm going through this, because she don't want to hear it.
I feel like there's a lot of wisdom at this table about this whole experience, and I'd like to ask each of you a little bit about how this whole experience has changed you and what you've learned. And Eleanor, you're smiling.
Yes.
Again.
I'm about to say something rather unusual. I have learned more from having this than I had ever thought possible. And I wouldn't give that learning up for anything. If the cost was having this, well, so be it.
Michael writes in his book, in Surviving AIDS.
Yes, sometimes I said this is like a blessing because it has stopped me from using drugs. It has made me see life different. I have taken time to learn about me, Norma.
But that's what I mean about the individual, of finding your resources within yourself.
Yes.
But there may be somebody listening right now who has just been diagnosed HIV positive or has just come back from their third visit to a hospital who might say, I'm glad to hear that you've reached this level of understanding. What would you say, Michael? I mean, you yourself write in your book, while I never would have wished for AIDS, the plain truth is that I'm happier now than I've ever been. to somebody who would say, I'm glad that you're happier now, but I've never felt worse? What
Well,
would you
I
say
try
to
to be
them?
very careful when I speak. AIDS is not a good thing, and there are other ways to learn these lessons. Basically, in one's life, one is dealt certain good things and bad things, and it's really a question of whether you let the bad things incapacitate you or whether you view them as learning experiences. And I know that it's very hard to look at AIDS that way. There's a lot of propaganda, a lot of people trying to interpret it for you, and I certainly don't mean to represent AIDS as like some EST seminar or some happy little workshop that you're taking. You're in AIDS for the long haul, but there isn't any point in using a diagnosis to give up. I mean, I have seen people will themselves to death, say it's not worth fighting, but I have also seen people blossom. And it's not just AIDS, of course. A lot of people, when they face life-threatening situations or major life changes, respond by just getting rid of all the stuff that was holding them back and just, you know, living each day.
We only have...
It's brought out the best and it's brought out the worst in the whole culture.
Well, let's just
Besides
talk about that.
ourselves.
We only have a minute or two left. You've all seen this epidemic begin and grow and change, and your own lives have changed. Maybe I should ask you this, Michael, since you've spoken to so many people. How do you think society has changed, and how do you think society will change as a result of this?
Well, at the end of the plague, Camus says, plagues teach us that there's more in humankind to admire than to despise. I say it's a draw. There's been some really horrible stuff, but there's been some really noble, incredible, self-sacrificing, beautiful stuff, and you take both.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate your coming. I'm sure the audience does as well. And we want you to know, too, that at midnight, Channel 13 will broadcast the Spanish-language version of AIDS in the Barrio. And we'd like to invite you to join us tomorrow evening with host Roger Rosenblatt and his guests, Broadway daredevils, Penn and Teller. I'm Paul Gorman. See you next week. Good night.
Funding for 13 Live is made possible by grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Jr. Charitable Trust, the Jacob Burns Foundation, and by the members of 13.